Hello everyone, Touchnot back with you. McGilvray Ferry, Part 2. The ferry itself was a simple affair, a flat-bottomed boat that was poled across the river. Things improved slightly in 1859. McGillivray located 350 feet of 2-inch rope, which he extended across the river. McGillivray attached the ferry to the rope to prevent it from being swept downstream in foul weather in high water, and inch by inch snubbed it across the swirling water. Hemp rope was only a partial solution. It stretched when wet and frayed with usage. So after one season, McGillivray went to La Crosse and returned with a load of 7/8-inch round iron rods 12 feet long, which he had the local blacksmith weld into one round bar 350 feet long. What? This was placed across the river with a heavy chain on one end, to which the ferry could be attached and then drawn along by a windlass. In time it was replaced by a wire cable which remained in use until the ferry was abandoned. The first ferry boat lasted 2 years, when a new one was constructed. In all, 5 boats were built, the last by G.O. McGilvray in 1890. That must be Gilbert. It ran until the McGillivray Bridge was completed in 1892 and was then sold to the operators of Gordon's Ferry upstream at Decorah Prairie. From time to time, the ferry landing had to be moved to comply with changes in the river channel. There were other challenges as well. Upstream, Wisconsin's lumber industry was booming, and the river became an artery for lumber rafts headed downstream. Lumber production on the Black rose from 6 million board feet in 1858 to 62 million in 1878. And the resulting increase in traffic made the operation of McGillivray's ferry more and more difficult. Log drives became a problem too. Usually they bothered only a few weeks in the spring for a few hours at a time, but occasionally the ferry was laid up for a week or two on the account of jams. In the summer of 1890, the ferry was blockaded for 5 months. In the spring, the river was also nearly solid with lumber rafts for over 2 miles above the ferry, tied up as close as they could together. There, the raftsmen had to break down their long strings of rafts into smaller units for the 9-mile journey from the ferry to the Mississippi. It was an operation that took time and added extra complications for McGillivray's operation. Log jams were a special problem. As one authority noted, the Black was an extraordinarily difficult stream for log driving. Sometimes several seasons passed before logs started on the upper waters reached the boom at La Crosse. Wow. Very few reached the mills until the second summer after they have been banked, and jams were frequent. McGillivray's son remembered in 1885 the river to be jammed solid for 36 miles. This jam remained in the river at McGillivray's Ferry from the last of March until the 15th of September before we crossed a team. Traffic often piled up as people sought to cross the river before it iced up for the winter. One cold, drizzly night, as the rain was falling, a string of 25 teams were waiting to cross on the ferry. The last in line was an ox team hitched to a wagon in which a mother was trying to hush the moanings of a sick child. The father ran forward from rig to rig, asking the drivers to give him the first chance to cross the river. The first 4 gave quick and gracious assent to his request, but the 20th in line told the distressed father that he could go to hell with the sick brat. The cruel reply was quickly carried from man to man to the river's brink, where Alex McGillivray was snubbing his boat. Then, clear and strong as a bugle's blast, came the old Scotsman's voice, "Not a rig will I carry until the mother and child have crossed the river." More than 20 voices rose in a rousing, "Hurrah for Mac!" This is amazing. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. And thanks for being with the Touch Knot. It had turned bitterly cold overnight, and McGilvray knew it would not be long before he would have to close down his operations for the winter. Still, the wagons kept coming, everyone hurrying to get to their selected lands and hoping to build a cabin or shanty before the snow began falling. Mac watched the rising sun peek over the horizon and looked further up the sky and noticed swirling clouds beginning to gather. The wind had risen and the temperature to fall. Cold, stormy weather was coming. With the sick child safely across the river, Mac could hear some sort of session going on across the river and hurried back with the ferry to greet the new arrivals and see what the yelling was about. It was freezing cold by the time he got there, and a raw wind was blowing. About 75 teams were now in line on the east bank waiting their turn when a man drove up, his wife and children screaming with cold. All the freight haulers but one told the man to drive past and get the children to the inn as soon as possible. One man, about 25 teams ahead of them, gave them to understand they could not go ahead of him, but the aggrieved father laid down his lines and sought desperately to convince the freight hauler that he would be out in the cold all day anyway, and only a matter of 3 minutes for him, and his children were freezing. When he was warming up on the freight hauler, Mac led the team with the woman onto the ferry and put them across. By the time the ferry got back for the next team, the man was convinced they could go ahead of him. On another occasion, 5 or 6 West Prairie farmers drove to Onalaska for lumber. The river was open and the ferry running. The next day, the men returned to find that the river had been closed for 12 hours. The horses were unhitched and the wagons loaded with 1,000 feet of lumber apiece and run across the ice by hand. The horses were then led across in safety. That was closing in rather suddenly. I'm going to stop for now, and we'll come back for Section 3 of the McGillivray Ferry. Thank you, my friends.